Okay, let's get going. So welcome. Today we're going to be talking about sleep and ways to really enhance your sleep naturally. We're really excited about this topic because it really does spill over into so much of our health. So with these talks, we really want to make sure you guys maximize the information that you gather from them. So if you have questions, please, we invite you to type them into the chat area, and that way we can really address them at the end when we have time for the Q&A section. So we don't want you to forget, so make a little note there. I'm Dr. Molly Force. I'm the clinical director here at Prosper. And today I've got with us Dr. Rosalie and Dr. Mary. So if you guys want to wave and say hi real quick. Dr. Rosalie brings an extra really cool addition of being an Ayurvedic practitioner as well as a naturopathic physician. And Dr. Mary specializes in Chinese medicine and is an acupuncturist as well as a naturopathic physician as well. So when we address our care, we're really trying to take a model that's very holistic, really use information that comes from many different medical modalities. And whenever possible, of course, we want to treat naturally. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure you guys walked away with was an understanding of what quality sleep actually is, and then, of course, understand the repercussions that sleep can have on your health. We also want you to understand that there are very definitive ways that can help you evaluate and even measure and monitor your sleep, even on the daily basis. And then we want you guys to walk away with tangible tips and ways that can really, hack your health here and really help you support that sleep cycle. So we want this to be really worthwhile information, and we hope that you guys walk away with tools that really can help you engage in better sleep.
So what are our 4 stages of sleep, and how does sleep work? Well, generally, we think about firstly the pineal gland that's in the brain that secretes melatonin, which I'm sure we've heard of. That's our sleep hormone, okay? And so melatonin will spike when the sun goes down and sort of lead us into our sleep cycle. And there's 4 stages of sleep, essentially. 3 of them are non-REM or quiet sleep, where the brain is kind of getting ready to solidify memories, to heal, to calm the body down. Our blood pressure decreases, our heart rate decreases. And then there's the 4th stage, which is our REM cycle, which is rapid eye movement. It's our active sleep, where the brain is most active, sort of coalescing together the experiences of the day and making memories, and that's when all of the sort of body healing happens. This is also the time where the body itself is paralyzed, essentially. All the voluntary muscles are no longer moving, which helps us to not sleepwalk around every night. And these cycles can go from 10 minutes up to 90 minutes, and sort of the full 4 cycles kind of repeat every hour and a half on usual, 4 to 5 times per night. And so to answer the question of how many hours of sleep do we need, it honestly depends. So adults, it varies. It can vary from 6 hours to 9 hours. For children, they often need a lot more, and babies the most out of all of us. And sometimes it's even worth comparing men versus women. And it depends on the literature and yeah, the literature in terms of the recommendations there. And I don't know, Dr. Molly, the answer to this question, actually, I thought it was equal, but.
Yeah, so there are different stages where women require more sleep than men. And part of that has to do with hormonal cycles and where women are in their fertility cycle. And so it makes sense, of course, that a pregnant woman who's gestating and growing an entirely new life is going to require more sleep during that time. But we also see that influence in other times of their fertility cycles. So in essence, we do find from the literature that women do, in fact, need more sleep than men. And then there are certain times that women really require more when they're in that fertility cycle versus when they're postmenopausal.
Excellent.
All right, so next I'm going to talk about hormonal influences on sleep. So there are our sex steroid hormones that can influence sleep drastically. We'll see a major change in our sleep patterns at different stages in life, as partially as Dr. Molly just alluded to, in menopause, there can often be an increase in insomnia. And this is often related to decreased progesterone. So it's something we really think about during that period when patients are having significant insomnia. We also have thyroid regulation. So with the thyroid gland, if it's under secreting thyroid hormones, we're going to be feeling sleepy all the time, just feeling really fatigued, having a hard time getting out of bed, versus if we're hyper secreting or over medicated on thyroid hormone, we're going to have a hard time sleeping. And there's often associated anxiety and feeling sort of extra charged and having too much energy. Cortisol is it's our main stress hormone. It's something that we need in the morning to get up and be active and alive. But if it gets dysregulated, it will cause, especially if it's rising in the evening rather than declining in the evening, as we'll discuss in a moment here, it'll cause some issues with sleep. And then we have melatonin, which is, as Dr. Rosalie was mentioning, is secreted from the pineal gland. And it is secreted in the evening in a regular sleep cycle, and it allows us to get into our sleep phase of the day. And as we'll discuss in the next few slides, cortisol and melatonin need to be tightly regulated and be secreted at the right time of day for us to have a regular sleep cycle. So as I mentioned, cortisol is our stress hormone. It has an anti-inflammatory action in the body, and it gets us ready to be up and active in the beginning of the day. So that's helpful when it's rising early in the morning and then decreasing throughout the afternoon. But if it's too high or dysregulated, it can cause problems, including increased blood sugar, increased sodium to potassium in our blood, and also increased blood pressure. And most importantly for this discussion, it'll cause major issues with getting to sleep in a regular fashion. So melatonin, as we were discussing, is our sleep hormone. And as you can see in this figure on the right here, they have an inverse relationship. So this is the diurnal cycle of cortisol and melatonin. And it's sort of the yin and yang cycle of the day where we have this increased energy from cortisol spiking in the morning, stimulated by sunlight, and then that slowly declines throughout the day and gets us ready for sleep as we onboard melatonin later on. And so this slide is going through some of the nitty-gritty of how melatonin is produced, but basically the take home here is that we're constantly producing the precursors to melatonin, and it's something we're working on actively all day. And we need some of these precursors, such as tryptophan. We can get it in turkey and pumpkin seeds. And it's something that we need to make sure we have adequate levels of in our system in order to create both serotonin and then down the line melatonin.
So when we're thinking about insomnia and sleep dysregulation, we like to divide it into two different types as healthcare practitioners. There are the people who have no problem getting to sleep, but then they're awoken in the middle of the night. And then there are the people who just lie awake and cannot initiate sleep. So we think about the sleep onset insomnia, those people who are just laying there with, maybe cycling all the worries of the day, and they can't fall asleep. And then there are these people who have sleep maintenance insomnia. So they're waking either frequently, maybe to get up and urinate, or they're waking way too early, maybe 5, 4:30 a.m., something like that. And then there are the unfortunate people who have kind of a combination of both types. And those are the people who are, of course, suffering the most. So take a second here and think about what your sleep type is. So are you the person who has no problem, you're going to sleep, you're maintaining a nice sleep, and you're waking up feeling fully rested? Are you the person who can go to sleep, like your head hits the pillow, you can fall asleep, but then maybe something's waking you up 1, 2, 3 a.m. or even 4 a.m. and can't get back to sleep? Or are you the person who's suffering from both, where you're really not getting any adequate sleep cycles in? Because depending on what's going on with you, that helps us, those clues really help us know physiologically what triggers might be causing this imbalance. And as natural physicians and naturopathic physicians, we just really love figuring out what the root cause is for that kind of disturbance. So we often like to think about symptoms that happen in medicine. And we want to make sure that these are recognized. Many of you know this because so many of us have had days or nights or weeks or even months or hopefully not years, but long periods of time sometimes where we don't get adequate sleep. So, the first kind of thing that starts to happen for the body is the brain isn't functioning clearly. So we start to get tired. We don't have the energy. We haven't had that cellular repair work. So that might equate to brain fog, but also that physical feeling of heaviness and fatigue. The difficulty with accessing some of our neurotransmitters and maybe even producing the precursors, like we talked about, to the happy hormone serotonin. It's so closely linked with that production of melatonin. A lot of times we see mood instability and irritability that happen. We can also have further sleep disturbances. So it is a learned cycle by the body, what time is bedtime and what time is wake time. So sometimes we fall into these cycles and the sleep disturbances, they get more sleep disturbances. So it's like this snowball sort of effect. We can also have blood sugar dysregulation, and that's because of kind of what Dr. Mary had discussed with that cortisol and melatonin being on this inverse relationship. So when you have high cortisol, you have low melatonin, and when you have high melatonin, you have low cortisol. Well, cortisol is a glucocorticoid. It regulates our blood sugar in a big way. So a lot of people will talk about having more cravings or disordered eating habits that are actually a result of their sleep patterns and that cortisol regulation. Of course, really a lot of changes can happen for our brain chemistry, and that also can affect our pituitary gland, and our hormonal imbalances can be seen by that. We often will see issues potentially with fertility and things like that when there's major sleep disturbances as well. We also know that disrupted sleep, melatonin is such a strong antioxidant that it can really affect our immune system whenever our sleep is very disturbed. So that's a really important one for us to think about. And then it makes sense if our blood sugar is off that we can have insulin irregularity, blood sugar irregularity, because remember that insulin comes in to sequester excess blood sugar, and then weight problems because of that. Do you guys understand why there could be issues with, I kind of alluded to the mood and the irritability, but with depression and anxiety? Does that make sense? When we have a problem with building our melatonin, it may be due to an upstream disorder with making that serotonin, or there being enough of that happy hormone serotonin. And then the lack of libido and sex drive. And that makes sense to some degree, because our bodies don't necessarily want to be fertile and having the burden of providing for more life whenever we are in an exhausted state and not getting the sleep that we need. So when we think about these causes of insomnia, it's really helpful for us to figure out what sleep type you are first and foremost. And then understand, is there something physical that's going wrong? Are you being disrupted by your sleep environment? Is the cat or dog jumping on your head in the middle of the night, or a kid like reaching out, or somebody making too much noise? Or is it biochemical? Is this happening because there's something that's either stimulating coming in, like caffeine or pharmaceuticals, or alcohol, which although it's a suppressant, it's not a stimulant. We know it blocks our ability to get into the sleep waves that we need for deeper sleep. Or biochemical, in that we have blood sugar irregularity. So we're being woken in the middle of the night saying, oh, I'm actually hungry. I need to go have a snack in the middle of the night. That's that evening snack or middle of the night snacker sort of red flag. Or is this hormonal changes that are biochemical? Or do we have another entire system that's imbalanced along the emotional sphere? So a lot of times our patients with PTSD or significant anxiety or major stressors, these can really play into that ability to have that good sleep onset in particular. So we also see this dysregulation that happens in our severely depressed patients who might be sleeping for longer durations into the morning, and that's affecting their diurnal cycle with that melatonin and that serotonin. And then, of course, that disruption of sleep can be traumatic for people. And so I definitely have worked with wonderful patients who've really struggled with a phobia around sleep time and having proper sleep etiquette, because it can be very traumatic not getting that rest that their body is so desperately craving. So other pieces here that I kind of skipped over when we were talking about the physical that should just be quickly touched on. People can be having restless legs. So that's where we're talking about this nocturnal myoclonus. That means these movements from our muscles that are going to be jerking and waking us up. Also, pain is a huge one. A lot of my patients who are dealing with pain, even like, they might feel like it's mild during the day, like hip or knee pain, that can be really waking them in the middle of the night, and they're not realizing it, but they're having to shift, and that's breaking their sleep cycle or having them have a hard time getting to sleep in the first place. And then sleep apnea is another huge one that we're going to discuss when we get into the testing components. And that can be really problematic, because if you're not getting, so apnea means you're not getting enough oxygen. So you could be waking up from gasping because your brain is saying, hey, I'm not oxygenated enough, wake up, this is an emergency.
So
I'll pass it on to you, Dr. Rosalie.
Thanks. We'll move into the next phase of our doc talk here, where we talk about how do we evaluate sleep. And there's 4 just sort of general ways to evaluate sleep. Number 1, the biggest piece sort of that we do here in office when we first see someone with the chief complaint of insomnia is just checking in on the patient, looking at the symptoms from a physical, mental, and emotional perspective, where we touch on these physical causes, the potential biochemical causes, the emotional causes. It's worth looking at all of those together to see if there's just one pretty obvious thing, or if it's a combination of a lot of different things. So generally, yeah, it's worth checking in yourself to see, okay, well, what's waking me up at night physically? Is it sort of the geographic changes, the fact that there's a bright light coming in through my window? Is it the mental causes, sort of the brain digesting the thoughts of the day, or is it something else? And so essentially, the body signals tell us a lot, and sometimes there's the body signals that we have to pay attention to more closely than others. And these include things like if you're snoring a lot, or if you're waking up 4 or 5 times to urinate, for example. Those are definitely things that need to be followed up with a doctor. Another way to evaluate sleep is with a 4-point cortisol test. So when we're evaluating a patient with insomnia, this is one of the first things we turn to as naturopathic physicians, and we can check it through the blood, through the saliva, or through the urine. And the sort of favorite way is to check through the saliva, since we're doing it 4 times a day. It's a lot easier for the patient to take home a vial and sort of spit into it, rather than it is to come into the office for a blood draw. Urine test is another way to address that test being done at home. And the reason we check for it 4 times a day is that we've got the diurnal rhythm that's happening, like Dr. Mary mentioned, where we spike our cortisol in the morning and it wakes us up, and then it really tanks at night so that we fall asleep, at which point melatonin spikes. And so you can see here's the normal results for a regular cortisol curve during the day. We're expecting a little spike in the morning and a gentle decrease throughout the day. We often can see the spike happening mid-afternoon, and those types of people really have a hard time getting up in the morning, or stay up late in the evening and are not getting the appropriate melatonin spike. So this is a really important test that tells us exactly how the diurnal rhythm is happening, and can very much help to explain what's going on with cortisol and whether that's a big player in insomnia. If stress is something that is hard to get a hold of, here's just a slide explaining we do have a stress release program here. It's through an app where we're sort of monitoring the app. But if stress is a big part that you already know is a big part to your insomnia, here's a pretty cool way to try to get that on dealt with and have us on board through this app.
And you can just access that through our website under Prosper Natural Health and under the programs if you're interested.
Okay, so we've already talked about sleep apnea a little bit. So the major sign that you're experiencing sleep apnea is when you're having significant snoring. And this can happen with aging and increased weight and many other factors that cause increased pressure on the vocal cords and doesn't allow you to get fully oxygenated when you're sleeping. And this is kind of a new hot topic in medicine, and it is something that can have pretty significant cardiovascular implications and holistic health implications. So in terms of evaluating for sleep apnea, there are you can go to a sleep center and they'll hook you up to a number of monitors and measure your oxygenation and heart rate and breathing rate. And now there's also at-home ones that you can do where physicians can give you the tools to do it in the comfort of your home. So this is a really important evaluation to get. And there are also just simple questionnaires that we can do in office to help you evaluate whether or not it's significant enough to impact your health. So another thing we do is blood work. So this is assessing for biological causes of any insomnia that is happening. Can you switch to the next slide and I'll talk through the specific blood work that we do. So we will often start with this basic workup depending on your picture. So a complete blood count will allow us to look at your blood cells and largely assess whether or not you're having any deficiencies in iron or B12 or folate that's affecting the production of those red blood cells. We can also look at a metabolic panel and in that we're largely looking at your glucose levels. So if your glucose is significantly high, that tells us that you have glucose dysregulation, and that can become a problem throughout the day and throughout the night when you're trying to sleep. Cortisol highly impacts our blood sugar levels. So when cortisol is really high, it kind of mobilizes all of our sugar and fatty acids so that we can use it and be active. And that's not what we want in the middle of the night. We want to be down regulated and not have all this stimulating action in our bloodstream. So that is one thing we look at, and it's a really great way. It's a great tool that we have to work with diet and supplements and nutrition to regulate that blood sugar release. We also will look at hormone panels, often salivary hormone panels, to look at your estrogens, progesterone, and testosterone, which can influence sleep, as I mentioned before, in addition to thyroid and cortisol levels.
So let's move on to the really fun stuff, where we're talking about what you can actually do to help with your sleep. So we came up with 7 different tips here today. And what we're hoping is that we're really going to provide you guys with a broad spectrum of things that you can try. And it's really important, of course, to think about what the root cause is. And then if these tips make sense in addressing either the physical, biochemical, or mental emotional components that are playing into your sleep. And I say components because rarely is it just one. Often there are multiple factors. So as we move through these, our slides are going to be available on our website afterwards. We want to make sure you guys get the information, but we wanted to also provide some really cool recipes and things like that. We don't want you to feel like we're moving too quickly, but this will be available as a recording and you'll get an email about that as well. So the first one we wanted to talk about with hacking your sleep is, ideally we want that 7 to 9 hours, depending on where you are in your life cycle and what your gender is also does affect. And then when we're thinking about that, it's important to make time for it. And I know that sounds silly, but a lot of us get into the evening and we're like, oh, we're really rolling on this task, or I'm finally getting a moment to myself to do something for myself, and that can really eat away at that time. So make sure that you're designating that time, that sleep time, that bedtime. And part of that is setting that routine. And in that process, we want you to take some time to think about what is the physical space that you're making for your sleep. So thinking about we call it like a Zen zone, where you really don't have a lot of electronics or light that could be stimulating, making sure it's as quiet as possible. And this can be really challenging when you have other beings in your household, whether they're human or animals. But thinking about ways to make a really quiet, secure space for you to be sleeping. So once you've set your schedule and you feel like you have a bedtime that you want, think about the routine that it takes to get there. And many of you, if you've experienced sleep, you've probably perfected the bedtime routine, but that is very important. Our body does take cues. I definitely believe that there are muscle cues in certain things that we do that can make us more sleepy. So think about that wind down time as part of your scheduled time in the routine that you're making in regarding your sleep. So of course, we want you to be resting on a really good quality bed and pillow. So if you haven't, rotated your mattress, flipped your mattress, or your mattress is very old, it may be time for an update. It's amazing how much of a difference that physical sleep can play into sleep duration and quality. So making sure that you're well supported, even just having the right pillows to prop yourself. It's amazing to me how many of my patients come back from working with physical therapists and say, oh my gosh, they taught me how to properly prop my knees and hips at night, and I can now sleep because the pain is so much reduced. I don't have to be constantly turning and thrashing at night to decrease pain. And then, of course, we want you to make sure that you're doing a little review with yourself and saying, hey, is the caffeine that I'm having earlier in the day too close to bedtime? And this extends even to chocolate. I know this well now that with having little children, that if for some reason they get something with a little bit of chocolate mid-afternoon, sure enough, they're going to be wired come bedtime. It's pretty consistent. So do a little check-in, make sure that your caffeine hasn't snuck too late in the day, or for some people, any caffeine during the day can really have an implication on sleep. And the same is true of alcohol. Our alcohol, that wine after dinner, for example, that's so routine for some people can be playing a huge disruptive process in their depth of their sleep waves. So we want you to set that routine. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I cannot stress how important following the cycle, the diurnal cycle that the earth, the waves, the lunar cycle provides for us. So we want to ideally be waking, usually with the sun. It's waking with that light stimulation and then going to sleep at night once it gets dark. Now that does not happen in our society. Let's be real. Like it's just not going to, and especially with our longer days here up further north. But that being said, we want to generally provide ourselves with that light and dark cycle when we're going to sleep. So making sure we have proper coverings for our windows, sunlights, maybe a sleep mask, those kind of things are just absolutely critical. Food intake, we're going to talk more about this, but it makes a big deal. It makes a big difference for our cortisol levels and our blood sugar levels, making sure that food intake is routine and we have a nice evening meal that will sustain us. And then making sure that we're getting the movement throughout the day. We know that movement affects our serotonin release, and that's a building block for melatonin. So just like Dr. Mary had discussed on the slide with the biochemical release, we are making these hormones all day long. We're doing the building block piece. And then our bedtime routine, of course, we've just talked about having it be kind of consistent. Your body will learn, okay, here it comes. We're going to be putting our head down on the pillow now. And then the wake up routine, same sort of thing, trying to have a wake up routine that's similar and around the similar time frame every morning. So things we definitely do want to make sure we're doing is having some form of protein consistently coming in with our evening meal. Even if our evening meal is light, we want to make sure we have the protein to sustain our blood sugar throughout the evening. We do not want to dip down into hypoglycemia and have the brain alerted, wake up, eat something, we're in trouble. We also want to make sure that before bed, we have this routine. And for some people, that's really engaging that parasympathetic nervous system, which we're also excited to talk about today. And that is doing things like dry skin brushing, where we have, anytime we have touch that goes that spans over two joints, we get this nice nervous system stimulation to be restful and calm that parasympathetic nervous system. Breath work engages in this as well. Some people will do castor oil packs, which provides a nice warmth around their abdominal area. And sometimes there are sensory activities that some people will do to kind of get their head in that nice calm space. So we really want to, of course, first and foremost, make sure we know what the imbalance is coming from. So if there's anything that we've touched on already today that resonates with you, make sure you jot it down so you don't forget by the end of this long presentation, and you can actually walk away with some nice changes to get better sleep.
So a second health hack we can do to help with insomnia actually has to do with fitness and movement, which you sort of think is counterintuitive. Like, how does movement and sort of revving up the body help with sleep? Well, ultimately, it has to do with timing. It has to do with how vigorous, essentially. Like Dr. Molly mentioned, movement helps create serotonin, which is useful for making melatonin downstream. Too much movement, termed exercise, essentially, too much exercise will raise your cortisol, okay? And cortisol, especially right before bed, so a lot of exercise right before bed is not going to be conducive to sleep. Remember, because cortisol rises and melatonin decreases. They sort of play in this opposite role. So what is helpful in terms of movement that helps build the hormones that help us sleep is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis, okay? It's all the way on the bottom there. NEAT, which is just a fancy term defining the types of movement that happen throughout the day that are not related to eating, sleeping, or cardiovascular exercise. So the things like, what do we do for work? What do we do as moms running around with our children? What do we do? How do we sit at a desk? Is it active? All of these sort of active movements that aren't termed as exercise necessarily are very important for helping build a good, robust store of serotonin, essentially. Fitness also is going to help us build our endorphins, right? And the endorphins help us when the sun goes down, kind of sustain us to remain nice and happy and not have our mood and our emotions come up and get digested during our sleep time, right? So some cool tools to help sort of evaluate this at home are on our smartphones or on our Fitbits. And I know the iPhone has a health app where you could put the iPhone on the bed and it sort of tracks the movement. Because remember, when we go back to the sleep cycles, the part of the sleep cycle where you're totally immobile is the REM sleep. And that's a really important time to monitor. And so these apps and these devices have little monitors known as accelerometers, okay? And they measure movement during the night. So the less movement, the deeper the sleep, essentially. And here's just an example of a tracking device that shows what your sleep might look like throughout the night.
Okay, so hack number 3. Here we'll talk about breathing exercises. So one of the best things about this is it's free and it's available to you at any time. And you can just use really simple breathing exercises throughout the day wherever you are. So something as simple as breathing in on a count of 6 and breathing out on a count of 10 is really helpful, especially when you're engaging your diaphragm and really breathing into your belly. It's a really grounding way to address your stress and to calm your nervous system throughout the day. So there's a common myth that taking a bigger breath oxygenates us more, but in reality, it's the regulating your breathing and slowing your out breath that's been shown to slow your heart rate and provide a more calming effect. There's also benefits from nose breathing versus mouth breathing, and paying attention to that can be really helpful. So when you breathe through your nose, that releases nitric oxide, which improves our systemic circulation and can particularly improve the circulation in the brain. And there's also great practices such as alternate nostrils breathing. Largely, these come from yogic and Ayurvedic traditions. And so Dr. Rosalie will talk about some of these when she discusses the Ayurvedic strategies for insomnia later on in the presentation. So number 4 is hack your nervous system. So similar to what we were just talking about, finding time to de-stress and practice mindfulness throughout the day, whether it's a 5-minute break in between meetings where you go and look at the forest or some water, or just close your eyes and do a breathing exercise. It's important to find and work in those chunks of time. Nature bathing, going out for a walk and being among trees and natural elements has been shown to improve anxiety and sleep outcomes. And you can also, one of the major tools that we'll talk about is activating your vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is related to what we call the parasympathetic aspect of our autonomic nervous system. So that's our involuntary nervous system, the part of our nervous system that's acting without our knowledge throughout the day. And this aspect of the nervous system is known as the rest and digest stage, that by stimulating the vagus nerve, we are able to induce a state in which we are able to fully rest and digest. So as that sort of term implies, it is regulating many of our internal organs, including our digestive system, our lungs, our heart, and it has vast effects on our nervous system. So ways to affect the vagus nerve. One is to control your stress. So it's to practice mindfulness activities, as we were just talking about. Also, focusing on your gut can be really helpful. There is a strong relationship between different types of neurotransmitter release and the stimuli from the gut, and specifically from the microbiome. And that is a well-known relationship that we're learning a lot about right now. And so addressing any dysbiosis or imbalances in your microbiome can be really helpful in providing a more stable catecholamine response throughout the day, or stress response throughout the day. Cold exposure is great. So this can just be as simple as jumping in a cold body of water. Something we known as hydrotherapy. If you are taking a shower and at the end turn it on cold, that is it short term activates your sympathetic nervous system. So it might increase your blood pressure and just make you feel kind of alive. But very quickly afterwards, it has a calming, down regulating effect. And then here's some simple tools for stimulating the vagus nerve, singing, humming, chanting. There's a reason why humans love to sing in groups. It sounds gross, but activating your gag reflex by brushing your teeth, gargling. These are all ways to directly stimulate your vagus nerve, which is in the back of your throat, or it has a branch in the back of your throat. And then daily exercise is key for flushing out those catecholamines throughout the day and providing that ability to calm down by the end of the day. And I will, acupuncture, and specifically auricular acupuncture, where small needles are inserted into the ear, is a really great way to stimulate the vagus nerve that I'll discuss a little bit later on when I talk about traditional Chinese strategies for insomnia.
So let's talk about hack number 5, which is food. As we know, food does so much for us. It's information for our body. It's information for our genes, for the transcription of those genes. We know when we're thinking about foods that are helpful for sleep, we want to be building precursors for melatonin, but of course it's not as simple as just that. We know that B vitamins, particularly foods that are high in B vitamins, can be very helpful with regulation of the adrenal glands. And because those adrenal glands are so closely connected with how our cortisol is released, that's going to be very important. We also know there's a lot of studies that show that calcium and magnesium, both of those minerals, are critical for sleep regulation. We know specifically that those affect how our muscles contract and release. We also know that high protein foods are not just going to help us sustain our blood sugar throughout the evening, but that they also are going to provide us with the amino acids like the methionine and the tryptophan that we were discussing earlier as precursors for these building blocks for our sleep hormones. And then we also know that our fats are critical, specifically those omega-3s, that brain food in particular, but omega-3s are used by every cell in the body. And so we really do need those as well for healthy sleep regulation. So let's talk about how we can affect this with some dietary habits. When we're talking about the vagus nerve that Dr. Mary was just introducing to us, we want to really induce that rest and digest, that parasympathetic nervous system, and exercise essentially that parasympathetic nervous system throughout the day. So we can also help by chewing our food thoroughly. That's going to help with the breakdown of that food. It's going to help with the nutrient absorption, as well as the vagus nerve doing its job with the gut motility. We also know that having a whole bunch of excess liquids with our meals can really make it harder to do some of the absorption that we need to do. We also know that if we can eat several hours before we sleep and not eat within 30 minutes to an hour of laying down, that also provides better sleep quality. Some of that may be physical. Some of our patients get heartburn whenever they are laying down right after eating a big bolus of food. And so some of it can be just a functional portion of the tubes and the pipes. But we also know that having time for the body to start that assimilation process and that rest and digest process is really important. We also know that if we can make our mid-afternoon or our lunch meal the biggest meal of the day when the sun is at its height, then that can be very helpful. We don't want huge quantities that we have to be digesting late into the evening when we need to be sleeping. And I keep talking about this high protein food. So having something that's going to help maintain that blood sugar is just so key. So for our folks that aren't vegetarians or vegans, meat and fish may be good options. Eggs can be great options for folks. Quinoa is a great full protein grain that's a good option for us. Actually, it's kind of in the seed category. Legumes and beans can be great protein sources for us. If you tolerate soy, then tofu or tempeh may be a good option. And nuts can be a good option as well for folks because they provide both that fat and that protein. So foods to think about really including are whole fruits and veggies and good quality meat, poultry, eggs. We like those veggies to really be the stars of the show. So we want to have our veggies. We're saying non-starchy veggies here, but really for most of our patients, if they're reducing the quantity of sugars and grains that they're having, they have plenty of room for the starchier root veggies. It's just that some of our patients who are really have to be careful about blood sugar, we don't want them having a whole bunch of root veggies only, like for example potatoes. They're just too stimulating to that blood sugar. So we do want root veggies with that caveat, and we do want those healthy fats. So those are the things like the avocado, olives, coconut, those kind of things. We love bone broths and good quality veggie broths. Those are going to be really easy. They'll have really easy amino acids in there, those proteins to assimilate. And, we really like having our patients include a variety of herbs and spices. They come with all kinds of important micronutrients as well as antioxidants. And then in regards to sweeteners, we prefer the natural sweeteners like the honey and the maple syrup, of course, to the conventionally processed sugars. We like to use that, of course, in moderation, because once again, we want blood sugar stability. The last thing we want is to have a really sugary dessert right before bed where our blood glucose spikes and our cortisol is spiking with that. And then to have you feel like you drop off that cliff once you go to sleep and then wake up from being bottomed out with low blood sugar from having a major insulin surge that happens in the evening. So as far as foods to stay away from, this is kind of what we were just talking about here with the stay away from the excess sweeteners, stay away from any stimulants, of course. The alcohol I've mentioned a few times here today. A lot of our sweetened beverages are no-nos, especially in the evening. We don't want to have too much liquid and water to process later on in the evening. So trying to have those earlier in the day. We certainly want our patients to be well hydrated, but we want to be cautious about not having too much of our water load and our beverage load to be in the evening. So we're not waking up to pee 3 or 4 times a night or more. We want to make sure that we're not having synthetic, processed, artificial flavorings, coloring, those kind of things that we know can be neural stimulants for people. And we want to be really careful about even things like our processed foods like juices, where all of the fiber has been removed and your blood sugar will go up right before bed, especially. So watch out for those really sugary things and make sure you have a nice balanced diet of lots of veggies and some good protein and some good fat in the evenings.
So hack number 6 has to do with supplements. And this is definitely a big topic. I often see a lot of patients come in already with a lot of supplements they're already on. When I talk to patients about insomnia, they're like, well, I've tried everything, right? All the supplements they can sort of find. And this section will walk you through the ones that we find to be the most useful. And there's 2 categories here: the vitamins, minerals, sort of nutraceutical stuff, and then our really amazing botanical materia medica. We have an apothecary here at Prosper that patients can come in and purchase supplements and herbs from us, and they're physician grade that we vet for as naturopathic physicians. So the nitty gritty of nutritional support, those first 2, L-tryptophan and 5-HTP, they work on the serotonin pathway. Again, this keeps coming back up again. How do we support our serotonin neurotransmitter so that our melatonin later downstream can be made? Before I recommend things like calcium, zinc, B5, or folic acid, I definitely want to make sure we check the blood work first. These are generally supportive supplements that are cofactors for helping make our sleep hormones. And then lastly, the very specific cofactors for serotonin, again, is our B6, vitamin B6, a nice B complex will contain it, as well as our B3. And then magnesium comes back yet again, a nice sort of sedative mineral here that helps our muscles relax and is also this cofactor. What is helpful for our adrenal system and normalizing cortisol are things that will essentially aid in the digestion of cortisol, so that again, cortisol can decrease and melatonin can spike. And that includes our Bs, again, our vitamin C, our magnesium. Also helpful here is our omega-3 fats, and then adaptogenic herbs, which is a special word in herbal medicine that talks about how do we deal with transitions a little bit better. An adaptogen is a type of herb that deals with stress and reducing stress, which is very important. And Dr. Mary will talk through the herbal medicine with us.
Great, thank you. So as Dr. Rosalie was just discussing, when it comes to herbal medicine, there's two major classes, or when it comes to insomnia and anxiety, there's two major classes of herbs that we like to target. One is adaptogen that helps regulate our cortisol release throughout the day. So that's really helpful for when there's this kind of low-level fatigue or fatigue during the day, and then a spike of energy later in the day. And that's often for people who are kind of tired and wired at the same time. Herbal medicine towards the end of the day can be, so there's another class that we like to use called nervines. And this is one that down regulates the nervous system, is great to use before bed. And these include herbs like passion flower, valerian, lemon balm, hops. These are all herbs that can grow easily in the Pacific Northwest, and they're great in a tea blend. So during the pandemic, one thing that has become really common, and before the pandemic, but it was way sort of got a lot more prominent during the pandemic, is just using alcohol to cut down stress towards the end of the day. And these are great to bring in when you're trying to move away from that habit and find a more moderate, sort of more gentle way to de-stress and sort of create that separation at the end of the day. Now is rest and digest time. So here's a great formula that you can look back at later on that you can make yourself for that purpose at the end of the day. So another way, so we think about using herbal medicine, ingesting it in pills and tinctures and teas. Another way to do it is through aromatherapy. So this is another fun way to use herbs, where you can sew them into cloth and make a dream pillow. And the scent of these herbs provides that cue that it's time for sleep when you go to lie down. This is another way to use aromatherapy. So using just straight essential oils, you can, things really calming essential oils like chamomile, lavender, rose, sandalwood. You can add to massage oils and do a self massage at the end of the day. You can add it to Epsom salt baths and add it to a hot relaxing bath. And then you can also use it in a diffuser by your bed. And again, that aromatherapy provides that cue for, it's almost like a Pavlovian response that you can get into sleep mode at the end of the evening.
Another tool that we have as naturopathic physicians are homeopathics. And some of our patients just really tremendously benefit from constitutional homeopathy and that more energetic medicine. So we typically at Prosper are specifically prescribing these to patients as individuals. We're seeing an individual case picture and deciding what remedies are appropriate at certain times for them. But this can be a really nice way to shift, especially for patients who feel like they're stuck in a certain pattern or are going through a transition time that they need help guidance through. And so this is an area that we will reach towards. And then sometimes we also use flower essences, which are kind of within that same energetic sphere as homeopathics. And we've listed some of our favorites there for sleep. And these are really gentle. Many of you may have heard of Bach flower rescue remedy. So that's an example of a flower essence that can be used as an energetic supportive to calm down and sometimes used for sleep as well. So our 7th hack is to hack your headspace. And what that means to us is really reducing the amount of chatter that's coming in that might be really influencing the mental and emotional component. So a lot of times this can come down to the basics of taking time to meditate or taking time to pray, if that speaks to you, taking time to journal, thinking about the positive things. We know that gratitude journaling in particular is very helpful for this kind of thing. And that also will theoretically help with our serotonin output too. We also want to make sure that we're taking that time to be in nature, connecting in with our sunrise, sunset, our diurnal cycle that we're along for the ride with. And then really clarifying if there are things that are stressors that are coming at you towards having a purpose and really figuring out what that means for you. Some of our patients really love EFT, and that's the tapping. And there are many different online guides to that, as well as a few really awesome practitioners in town who teach that. And that can be really helpful for stimulating that parasympathetic, calm down nervous system piece. I've also had patients who really liked to use some kind of odder things that will help with brain regulation with that headspace. And one of those is this headgear that actually is called the Ebb, and it wraps around and it actually cools your forehead and your head. And the biochemistry behind this is that there are temperature regulations that can trigger different neural patterns for the brain. And so for patients who really are dealing with cycling thoughts and issues like that, for sleep onset in particular, this can be a really cool tool that a lot of people might not know about. So now we get to talk about the really neat Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese herbal components as well. So Dr. Rosalie, I'll have you take this away.
Thanks, Dr. Molly. Yeah, so, we just spent a nice segment of an hour here talking about all the naturopathic things. But when we go into Eastern medicine and think about insomnia from both the Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medical perspectives, a whole, new gamut of things comes up in terms of how to think about this. So in Ayurveda, it means the science of life in Sanskrit. It's the traditional medicine from India. And insomnia, specifically known as nidra, is due to our high vata and high pitta. And remember, vata is our air and space element, and pitta is fire. So the way we think about that is the energy is kind of rising into the brain and preventing us from grounding and sleeping, which has to do with our kapha dosha. And kapha is earth and water. So it makes sense, right? If we're totally in our heads, too hot, too aggravated, we can't sleep and really dig our roots into the earth. Another treatment from the Ayurvedic perspective is to increase our Agni, our digestive fire. So again, it kind of all comes back to the belly. How is the belly working? If the belly is not working, it's hard to sleep. All that digestion gets put off into the night hours. And then another really big general treatment here is routine. And I know we've harped on this, but it is so important, especially when it has to do with grounding vata dosha, to have consistent routines. And we sleep before 10 p.m. because 10 p.m. marks the time of day when we move into our pitta time, our heating time of day, either 10 a.m. or 10 p.m. Same ideas there. And so some of the herbal medicines, some of the dietary recommendations are here for your reference. When the naturopathic stuff doesn't end up working, that my first go-to from the Ayurvedic perspective is nutmeg, which is pretty potent and has a 12-hour effect. Okay, so I have patients fresh grate it, take half a teaspoon in water around 6 p.m. and it holds them over to 6 a.m. and sort of peaks in the middle of the night. Okay. From the Ayurvedic diet perspective, again, we're decreasing vata, increasing kapha. So decrease cold, dry foods, increase warm, fatty, soupy meals. Okay. And then from the lifestyle perspective, if we're oiling our body with an oil massage, either to the feet or the abdomen, or doing a castor oil pack, that helps us root in and dig into our parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. Pranayama is another way. It's that alternate nostril breathing is the one I recommend to patients. And it's the one that helps us oxygenate gently and prepare for sleep and calm down by engaging that vagus nerve again, the one that activates our diaphragm, helping us breathe in and out. And it's simple. We plug one nostril, we breathe in, we plug the other one, we breathe out, and sort of continue that up and down breath. And even just 5 breaths can really calm us down. Yoga Nidra, maybe you've heard of, is our gentle sleep yoga. Okay, we're not talking about heating Bikram or any of the other sort of yoga flows. We're talking about really gentle grounding poses. And the last big piece Ayurvedically has to do with Vastu, which is the Ayurvedic Feng Shui. Okay, and it has to do with the directions of how you sleep and whether one is energizing and one is calming down. But something, you know, energetically to try is to try to angle the headboard of your bed in any direction but the north. The north is kind of our activating direction. That's definitely more energetic, kind of a last resort recommendation there.
All right, thank you. I always love hearing about the Ayurvedic strategies because they're so fascinating and yummy. So next we'll talk about the traditional Chinese medicine strategies for insomnia. So just a brief introduction. Traditional Chinese medicine is a style of medicine that originated in China and has been practiced for thousands of years and has a system based on 5 elements. And each of these elements is related to one of the 5 major organs, and these are all connected to acupuncture meridians that flow throughout the body. We also have these ideas of qi, which is the animating force of the body, blood, which is the grounding, substantive, nurturing force, and then yin and yang, which are the opposing, you know, active, vibrant, that's the yang side associated with like the sun and male energy, and then yin is the grounding, nourishing aspect of our physiology. So in traditional Chinese medicine, the mind is often related to the shen, or sorry, sleep is often related to what we call the shen or the mind. And this is housed in the heart organ. And it needs, so the heart needs a balance of yin and yang, and it needs a balance of heating and cooling elements. So when the mind is housed in the heart and there's no major heating or excitatory elements, and it's in a good place and it provides for proper sleep. Insomnia, or also known as 失眠, is known as a disruption of the mind or the shen. And this can be caused from a number of different underlying patterns. So overstimulation of the shen in the heart by heat, qi and blood stagnation or constraint, and then this idea of blood deficiency, and that, so the lack of that grounding, nourishing substance, or what we call heart blood, means that the shen is not anchored and is floating around and causes insomnia at night. So in traditional Chinese medicine, the two major modalities that we use are acupuncture and herbal medicine, in addition to dietary and lifestyle strategies. So within traditional Chinese medicine, we have a variety of herbs to address insomnia. And what I love about it is we can choose the herbs that are specific to those underlying patterns and to someone's constitution. So here's an example of two amazing herbs. The first one is mimosa flower. You can see that growing around the Pacific Northwest right now. They're really gorgeous, and they're in traditional Chinese medicine. They're known to calm the shen, relieve constraint, and regulate qi. They also invigorate and harmonize the blood. So this, as you can imagine, is working on more of those excess, either qi, the sort of heart fire or increased heat, or the stagnation picture. And from a Western perspective, they act on serotonin receptors and they're mild anxiolytics. So great towards the end of the night when you want to go to bed. Chinese date, or jujube, on the other hand, is known to tonify the blood and to calm the shen. So this is when you have a deficiency of heart blood that's not grounding the shen in the heart. That's when you would more likely use this. And this herb, known as da zao, it's great. You can use it as a food, so you can cook it into like a dessert, and you can also decoct it in a tea formulation. And it contains my favorite constituent name, which is jujubicides, which have a mild hypnotic effect. All right, and then so lastly, I'll talk about acupuncture for insomnia. We generally think of acupuncture for the more excess kind of stagnation aspect or underlying pattern causing insomnia. So it's great for moving qi and blood and relieving stagnation. And auricular acupuncture is a relatively new form of acupuncture relative to the traditional Chinese medicine form. And it's based on a system of points around the ear. So interestingly, the vagus nerve has its only access to our skin through the center part of the ear. So, and there are studies that have shown that by stimulating the center part of the ear with needles or electrical stimulation, you can have a regulating effect on some of those internal organs like the heart and the digestive system. So really fascinating stuff here.
So that concludes our talk today about ways to help with sleep. We want to make sure that we answer any questions that you guys might have had today, and also invite you to the next Doc Talk, which is going to be the second Tuesday at noon in September. And remember, if you can't make it at that time, no problem. Just make sure to sign up so we can get you the link to the recording sent out. And that one is going to be on improving digestion. It's going to be a really important one. So making sure that you can have access to that, would be wonderful. And we look forward to seeing you guys there. We also just want to invite you, if you're having issues with sleep, it really does drag down the rest of your system. And so it can be really problematic for reaching health goals. So just remember, we're here. Give us a call or jump on our website, and our staff is happy to get you scheduled to chat with us. And let's see, do we have any questions? Looks like there's a question here from Linda asking about cheese and hops. Okay, good question. So cheese, I'm guessing you're asking, is it okay? So this is very dependent on if the person tolerates dairy, but if we think about heavier, more fatty, protein-rich foods, cheese does fall on that category. For many of our patients, it's too congesting and mucus producing for us to be saying like, hey, have a whole bunch of cheese, but it can be a really good option for some. And it's just my recommendation usually to not have it right before you go to bed, because it can cause some extra mucus and maybe even acid reflux. And then the question about hops and whether or not beer is okay. Hops is a very well-known herb that is a sedative and can be really helpful for initiating sleep. Usually when it's brewed into beer, it still maintains some of that sedative effect. So it can be technically used medicinally. Our concern, though, about beer would be the alcohol component and how that can affect the ability to get into that deep sleep that's so important. Do you other physicians have any comments on beer or cheese?
Yeah, so I agree with what you were saying about the hops still having that medicinal effect, but then with alcohol, so often it'll knock you out. And then in the middle of the night, people will be like, why am I waking up at 3 a.m.? And if you've had a couple of drinks before bed, it's that release of sugar and also just the dysregulation of your nervous system that can then cause insomnia, even though it initially helps you sleep. So if you're looking for the flavor of hops without the alcohol, the tea is really great. There's also this carbonated beverage called hops tea that they sell at the co-op and a bunch of health food stores. And it's a really nice kind of, carbonated beverage that tastes hoppy and is not sweetened. And I love recommending that to people.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Dr. Molly and Dr. Mary. Yeah, the last piece here, just to touch on cheese again, is that cheese is so heavy to digest and really dampens the Agni, the digestive fire, which leads to you having to digest during the night, which is not sleep promoting. So in general, it addresses making sure that nighttime meal is not too huge.
Thank you all for spending your time with us today. And we just look forward to more of these, and we just love doing it. It's been so nice to be able to connect with you all, even with some of the pandemic restrictions. So thank you, and spread the word that we're doing these, because we just love sharing this information. Take care, and we'll see you next month.